I need everyone watching this video to stop what you're doing right now and listen very carefully, because what happened on Raw last night is not just another work-shoot promo, not just another storyline swerve, not just another attempt by WWE to blur the lines between reality and fiction. Paul Heyman, the greatest manager in wrestling history, the wise man, the special counsel, the advocate who has been the mouthpiece for WWE's biggest stars for over 2 decades, walked out onto that stage last night and burned every single bridge he's ever built with the company in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. And before you start typing in the comments that this is all a work, that Paul is too smart to actually quit WWE, that this is just setting up his next angle, let me tell you something that's going to make you question everything you think you know about how wrestling works in 2026. There are credible reports from multiple sources backstage that Paul Heyman went completely off script during that segment, that he was supposed to deliver a standard promo setting up the next phase of whatever storyline they had planned, but instead he took that microphone and he said everything he's been wanting to say for years about creative direction, about how WWE wastes talent, about how storylines get started and abandoned, about how the same repetitive formula gets recycled over and over while genuinely compelling ideas get shot down by people who don't understand wrestling. And then he dropped the microphone, walked out of the arena, and according to several wrestlers who've posted cryptic messages since then, Paul Heyman is legitimately done with WWE after decades of being one of their most valuable and reliable performers. Now maybe this is the greatest work in modern wrestling history and we're all getting played, but something about what happened last night felt different, felt real, felt like watching someone finally snap after years of biting their tongue and playing the corporate game. And whether this is a shoot or a work, the conversation it started about WWE's creative process and storytelling philosophy is one that desperately needs to happen. Let me walk you through exactly what transpired last night, because the context leading up to this moment is crucial to understanding why it matters so much and why people are losing their minds trying to figure out what's real and what's performance. Paul Heyman has been involved in various storylines recently, working with different talents, doing what he does best, which is talking and elevating whoever he's managing through the sheer force of his incredible promo ability. But if you've been paying attention, and most casual fans haven't been but the hardcore audience definitely has, Paul's been looking increasingly frustrated on television. Little moments where his usual polish and perfection seemed to crack slightly. Promos that felt like they were building to something but then went nowhere. Storylines that started with promise but got dropped or changed direction without explanation. The kind of creative inconsistency that drives performers crazy, but usually they just deal with it because that's the job and you don't publicly complain about the hand you're dealt. Raw opened last night with Paul Heyman scheduled to do a promo segment. Nothing unusual about that. Paul's one of the most reliable performers on the roster, and giving him 10 minutes to talk is usually money because he's going to deliver something compelling and quotable that gets people talking. He walked out to his usual music, got in the ring with a microphone, and started what seemed like a normal Heyman promo. He was talking about whichever wrestler he's currently advocating for. I honestly don't even remember because what happened next completely overshadowed anything that came before it. He was going through the motions, hitting the expected beats, and then he just stopped mid-sentence. Complete silence. The crowd was confused. The announcers went quiet, and Paul Heyman looked directly into the camera with an expression that was impossible to read. He started talking again, but this time it was different. His whole demeanor changed. The performative nature of his usual promos disappeared, and what replaced it was something that felt raw and genuine and uncomfortable to watch. He said he was tired. Tired of pretending that what WWE is doing with their storylines makes any sense. Tired of being given 15 different creative directions in a single week. Tired of building something compelling only to have it changed or abandoned because someone in a suit who's never worked a match in their life decided they have a better idea. Tired of watching incredibly talented performers get misused or wasted because they don't fit whatever narrow vision management has for what a star should look like. The crowd didn't know how to react because this wasn't a typical heel promo where Heyman insults them. This wasn't him building heat for whoever he's managing. This was Paul Heyman the person, not Paul Heyman the character, expressing genuine frustration about the creative process in WWE. And you could feel the tension through the screen because everyone watching, from the fans in the arena to the viewers at home to the wrestlers backstage to the executives in gorilla position, everyone was trying to figure out if this was part of the show or if Paul had gone rogue. He continued for several minutes, and what he said was devastating in its honesty and specificity. He called out storylines by name, storylines that got started with huge hype and then just disappeared without resolution. He talked about performers who were getting over with the crowd organically but got pulled back because they weren't the chosen ones that management wanted to push. He mentioned specific instances where weeks of storytelling got thrown out at the last minute because someone changed their mind about the direction. He criticized the over-reliance on the same match structures and storyline beats that WWE has been using for decades while claiming they're being innovative and fresh. The most damaging part was when he started talking about how decisions get made. He said there are too many voices in the room, too many people who need to approve every single creative choice, too much corporate oversight strangling the organic storytelling that made wrestling great in the first place. He said that wrestlers used to have freedom to develop their characters and cut promos that reflected who they actually are as people, but now everything is scripted within an inch of its life by writers who've never performed and don't understand the rhythm and psychology of how wrestling storytelling actually works. He said WWE has become so obsessed with controlling every aspect of the show that they've forgotten how to let moments breathe and develop naturally. And then Paul Heyman did something that sent shockwaves through the entire wrestling industry. He looked directly into the camera one more time and said that he can't do this anymore, that he's given WWE everything he has for years and it's not enough because the system is broken and he doesn't have the energy to fight it anymore. He said he's grateful for the opportunities he's had and the people he's worked with, but effective immediately he's done. He dropped the microphone in the center of the ring, the sound echoing through the stunned silent arena, and he walked out. No music. No fanfare. Just Paul Heyman walking up the ramp and through the curtain while cameras frantically tried to follow him and production scrambled to figure out what to do next. The show cut to commercial immediately, and when they came back there was no mention of what had just happened. The announcers moved on to the next segment like nothing occurred, which only added to the confusion and the speculation that this wasn't planned. Because if it was a worked shoot, if this was an angle, WWE would milk it. They'd have the announcers expressing shock and concern. They'd show backstage reactions. They'd give updates throughout the show. The complete radio silence was deafening and suggested that nobody knew what to say because this wasn't in the script. Social media absolutely exploded. Within minutes Paul Heyman was trending worldwide. Wrestling journalists were frantically trying to get confirmation from sources about whether this was real or a work. Current and former wrestlers started posting cryptic messages that could be interpreted either way. Some seemed to be supporting Paul's frustrations, suggesting they agree with his criticisms. Others posted more ambiguous statements that didn't really clarify anything. The wrestling media landscape turned into complete chaos, with everyone trying to be the first to break the story of what actually happened. What makes this situation so complicated and so fascinating is that Paul Heyman is exactly the type of person who could pull off the greatest work in wrestling history. He's a genius at blurring reality and fiction. He understands psychology better than almost anyone. He knows how to work the internet and social media to create maximum buzz. If anyone was going to create a shoot angle so convincing that even industry insiders couldn't tell what was real, it would be Paul Heyman working in conjunction with WWE Creative. But that's also what makes this terrifying, because if it is real, if Paul genuinely has quit and went off script to air legitimate grievances, then WWE has a massive problem on their hands. Let's examine the evidence suggesting this might be a legitimate shoot. First, the complete lack of follow-up during the rest of Raw. No backstage segments trying to stop Paul from leaving. No authority figure coming out to address what happened. No mentions from announcers. That radio silence is extremely unusual for WWE, who typically would turn something like this into a multi-segment storyline across the entire show. Second, multiple wrestlers have posted things since then that suggest genuine surprise and support for Paul taking a stand. These aren't the kind of posts you'd see if everyone was in on an angle. Third, credible wrestling journalists with actual sources inside WWE are reporting that this was not the planned promo and that there's genuine confusion backstage about what happened and what it means. But here's the evidence that this could be an elaborate work. Paul Heyman is still under contract to WWE, and walking out doesn't just void that contract. There would be legal and financial ramifications that Paul is smart enough to understand. If this was a legitimate quit, he'd likely have given notice privately and worked out the details before making a public spectacle of it. Second, everything Paul said during that promo, while critical of WWE Creative, was said in a way that didn't burn any personal relationships or say anything so severe that it couldn't be walked back later. He criticized the system, not specific people, which suggests he was being careful even while appearing to shoot. Third, this generates massive interest and buzz for WWE programming, and Paul knows that creating controversy and getting people talking is good for business even if it's uncomfortable in the moment. The frustrations Paul expressed resonate with a huge portion of the wrestling fanbase because we've all seen the exact patterns he was criticizing. How many times have we watched a storyline start with incredible potential only to get dropped or changed randomly? How many times have we seen a wrestler getting organically over with crowds only to get depushed because they weren't the person management wanted in that spot? How many times have we seen the same match structures and storyline beats recycled endlessly? Paul was giving voice to criticisms that have been building in the wrestling community for years, and that's part of what made his promo so effective and so devastating, whether it was shoot or work. The bigger conversation this has sparked is about creative freedom in modern WWE and whether the current system actually serves the product or hurts it. WWE has more writers and producers and corporate oversight than ever before. Every promo is scripted. Every segment is meticulously planned. Every camera angle is choreographed. And yet, with all that control and all those resources, the storytelling often feels inconsistent and unsatisfying. Meanwhile, some of the hottest angles and most memorable moments in wrestling history happened with far less oversight, when performers had freedom to develop their own characters and tell their own stories. Paul's criticisms, whether genuine or worked, tap into a fundamental tension between corporate control and creative freedom that exists not just in WWE but across the entertainment industry. There are performers in WWE right now who are incredibly talented but feel handcuffed by the system. They want to try things, want to develop their characters in interesting directions, want to cut promos that feel authentic to who they are as people, but everything has to be approved by multiple layers of management and often gets watered down or changed until it's unrecognizable from the original vision. That frustration is real even if Paul's expression of it last night was worked. And giving voice to that frustration on live television, whether as part of an angle or as a legitimate complaint, is going to resonate with a lot of performers who feel the same way but don't have the platform or the guts to say it publicly. From WWE's perspective, this situation is delicate regardless of whether it's shoot or work. If it's a work, they need to be careful about how they follow up on it because going too far with criticizing their own product can be counterproductive even if it generates short-term buzz. If it's a shoot, they have a massive public relations problem where one of their most prominent performers just went on live television and systematically criticized how the company operates. Either way, they need to address this in some form, and the way they handle it will tell us a lot about what's actually happening behind the scenes. The Paul Heyman situation also raises questions about how wrestling companies should handle worked shoots in the modern era. Audiences are more sophisticated than ever. People understand that wrestling is predetermined. They know about backstage politics and creative processes. So when companies try to create worked shoot angles that play with those concepts, they're walking a tightrope between being clever and being insulting to the audience's intelligence. If this is all an angle and it gets revealed as such, will fans feel manipulated or will they appreciate the elaborate con? That answer probably depends on whether the payoff is satisfying and whether the story this sets up is actually good. There's also the personal element to consider. Paul Heyman is 60 years old. He's been in wrestling for over 40 years. He's accomplished everything there is to accomplish in the business multiple times over. He's made stars, revolutionized managing, created legendary promotions, and cemented his legacy as one of the most important figures in wrestling history. Does he really need to keep doing this? Does he need to continue navigating corporate politics and creative frustrations at this stage of his life and career? Or would walking away, whether permanently or temporarily, actually make sense for him as a person independent of any storyline considerations? The reactions from other wrestlers have been fascinating to watch unfold. Some have posted supportive messages that could be read as supporting Paul's decision to speak his truth even if it's controversial. Others have been more cautious, posting vague statements that don't really take a side. A few have posted things that seem to criticize the idea of airing grievances publicly rather than handling them internally. But nobody has come out and definitively said this was all planned or that Paul was in the wrong for what he did, which suggests there's at least some sympathy for the frustrations he expressed even among people who might not agree with how he expressed them. The timing of this is interesting because WWE is in the middle of a crucial period heading into their biggest events of the year. Losing Paul Heyman, whether through legitimate quitting or through a storyline absence, creates a hole that's difficult to fill. Paul has been involved in some capacity with major storylines and his absence affects planning and creative direction. If this was planned, then presumably they have contingencies. If it wasn't planned, then they're scrambling right now to figure out how to adjust everything Paul was supposed to be involved in going forward. What I find most compelling about this entire situation is how it forces us to confront our relationship with wrestling and what we actually want from it. Do we want the carefully controlled corporate product that WWE provides where everything is polished and professional but often feels sterile and predictable? Or do we want the chaos and unpredictability and occasional brilliance that comes from giving performers more freedom even if that means more mistakes and less consistent quality? Paul's promo, whether shoot or work, represents one side of that debate and WWE's silence and subsequent booking represents the other side. The business ramifications are significant if Paul Heyman has legitimately quit. He's still one of the most valuable non-wrestling performers in the industry. Other companies would absolutely be interested in bringing him in, whether as an on-screen character, a creative consultant, or both. If he's genuinely done with WWE, then where he ends up next becomes one of the most interesting storylines in wrestling, even if it's happening in real life rather than on television. Would he go to AEW? Would he start his own project? Would he just retire from the business entirely? All of those possibilities have massive implications for the wrestling landscape. But if this is all a work, if Paul Heyman and WWE Creative constructed this entire angle together, then the question becomes, what's the endgame? Where is this story going? Who does it benefit? What's the payoff that makes all this controversy and confusion worthwhile? Because if you're going to do a work shoot of this magnitude, if you're going to have one of your most prominent performers criticize your company on live television even in a fictional context, there needs to be a compelling reason for it and a satisfying conclusion to the story you're telling. The internet wrestling community is completely divided on this, which is probably exactly what Paul and WWE want if this is an angle. Some people are convinced it's real based on the specific criticisms Paul made and the way WWE handled the aftermath. Others are equally convinced it's a work based on Paul's history and the fact that this generates exactly the kind of buzz that WWE loves. And a third group is acknowledging that they genuinely can't tell either way, which might be the most interesting position because it means the line between reality and fiction has been blurred so effectively that even sophisticated wrestling fans who understand the business are uncertain. What happens next is going to be crucial in determining what this actually was. If Paul shows up next week like nothing happened, we'll know it was an angle, even if a controversial one. If he's gone for an extended period and WWE starts acknowledging his absence as part of storylines, it could still be an angle, just a longer-term one. If he never appears on WWE television again and we start seeing reports of him working elsewhere or retired, then maybe this was the real thing. But in today's wrestling landscape, where companies are constantly trying to work the internet and blur reality, we might not know the truth for weeks or months or maybe ever. The one thing I know for certain is that Paul Heyman created one of the most talked about moments in recent wrestling history last night, regardless of whether it was real or planned. He got everyone talking. He got everyone debating. He forced conversations about creative processes and storytelling philosophy that the wrestling industry needs to have. And he did it all in about 10 minutes with nothing but a microphone and his incredible ability to make people believe what he's saying even when they know they probably shouldn't. So drop your thoughts in the comments and let me know what you think. Was this a legitimate shoot or an elaborate work? Do you agree with Paul's criticisms of WWE creative, or do you think he was out of line? Where do you think this story goes from here? Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, because this story is just getting started and we're going to be covering every development as it unfolds. Paul Heyman either quit WWE last night or started the greatest worked shoot angle in years, and either way wrestling just got a lot more interesting.